Last week when I told you about Zelophehad's daughters, I briefly mentioned that we didn't know much about him other than he died during those 40 years in the wilderness from Egypt to the Promised Land, and that he wasn't part of the rebellion that was against Moses, and that the writers of Scripture wanted you to know that. So today I'm going to tell you about that rebellion against Moses. It's probably a bit of Scripture that you've never heard about. It's one of those Old Testament stories that doesn't paint God in the best light. God seems pretty petty, hot-headed, and extremely violent. So let me tell you about it. Korah was the leader of this rebellion against Moses and Aaron during the journey of the Israelites from Egypt to the Promised Land. We know that Korah was a great grandson of Levi, who was the third of Jacob's 12 sons. Korah was also a first cousin of Moses and Aaron. So he and a couple of other main leaders didn't like Moses and Aaron's leadership. They thought that those two had exalted themselves, saying that God would only work and speak through them. So we hear about this rebellion in Numbers 16. This is how it starts. Korah came to Moses and Aaron with 250 Israelite men, leaders of the congregation, chosen from the assembly, well-known men, and they confronted Moses. They assembled against Moses and against Aaron and said to them, "You have gone too far. All the congregation are holy, every one of them, and the Lord is among them. So why then do you exalt yourselves above the assembly of the Lord?" When Moses heard it, he fell on his face. Then he said to Korah and all his company, "In the morning the Lord will make known who is his and who is holy, and who will be allowed to approach him. The one whom God will choose, he will allow to approach him. Do this: take censers, Korah and all your company, and tomorrow put fire in them and lay incense on them before the Lord. And the man whom the Lord chooses shall be the Holy One. You Levites have gone too far." Okay, so after that, God tells Moses and Aaron to separate themselves from the congregation because God's going to, and I quote, "consume them in a moment." So Moses and Aaron talk God out of that. But then God tells them to warn the congregation to separate themselves from Korah and the other two men who led the rebellion. So Moses says to the congregation, "Turn away from the tents of these wicked men and touch nothing of theirs, or you will be swept away for all their sins." And then Moses continues by saying, "This is how you shall know that the Lord has sent me to do all these works. It has not been of my own accord. If these people die a natural death, or if a natural fate comes on them, then the Lord has not sent me. But if the Lord creates something new, and the ground opens its mouth and swallows them up with all that belongs to them, and they go down alive to Sheol, then you shall know that these men have despised the Lord." As soon as he finished speaking all these words, the ground under them was split apart. The earth opened its mouth and swallowed them up, along with their households, everyone who belonged to Korah, and all their goods. So they, with all that belonged to them, went down alive to Sheol. The earth closed over them, and they perished from the midst of the assembly. Yikes, God. But wait, God is not quite done yet, because the story continues. Here's what it says. All Israelite around them fled at their outcry, for they said, "The earth will swallow us too." And fire came out from the Lord and consumed the 250 men offering incense. You know, this kind of reminds me of that scene in Raiders of the Lost Ark. Remember when fire consumes all those Nazis? I'm wondering if the writers or the directors of that movie had this biblical story in mind when they did that scene in the movie. Okay, Then the next 4 verses are this little bit about God commanding Aaron's son to collect the censers out of the fire. For the censers of these sinners have become holy at the cost of their lives. Then Aaron's son is to make them into hammered plates as a covering for the altar, as a reminder, quote, to the Israelites that no outsider who is not of the descendants of Aaron shall approach to offer incense before the Lord, so as not to become like Korah and his company, just as the Lord has said to him through Moses, end quote. But wait, this gruesome, weird story is still not over, because the rebellion is still not over. This is how verse 41 continues. On the next day, however, the whole congregation of the Israelites rebelled against Moses and against Aaron, saying, "You have killed the people of the Lord." And when the congregation had assembled against them, Moses and Aaron turned toward the tent of meeting. The cloud had covered it, and the glory of the Lord appeared. Then Moses and Aaron came to the front of the tent of meeting, and the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Get away from this congregation so that I may consume them in a moment." And Moses and Aaron fell on their faces. Moses said to Aaron, "Take your censer and put fire on it from the altar and lay incense on it and carry it quickly to the congregation and make atonement for them. For wrath has gone out from the Lord. The plague has begun." Yep, that's right. God, who sent 10 plagues on the Egyptians, is now so upset and angry with the Israelites that God's going to wipe them out with a plague of their very own. So here's what happens next. So Aaron took it as Moses had ordered and ran into the middle of the assembly where the plague had already begun among the people. He put on the incense and made atonement for the people. He stood between the dead and the living, and the plague was stopped. Those who died by the plague were 14,700, besides those who died in the affair of Korah. When the plague was stopped, Aaron returned to Moses at the entrance of the tent of meeting. So, it's difficult to know what to do with these troubling texts, where God doesn't seem to act very gracious and merciful, slow to anger, and abounding in steadfast love. You know, God-like. Theologians and Bible scholars over the centuries have theories, ideas, and theologies to try to explain biblical stories like this. And I could go on and on about how I read stories like this. But when it comes down to it, we simply don't know. The Bible is full of weird stories. Some are comical, some are poignant, some are bizarre, and some, like this one, are just odd and troubling. As Old Testament scholar Peter Ennis says, what if the Bible is just fine the way it is? Not the well-behaved, everything is in order version we created, but the messy, troubling, weird, and ancient Bible that we actually have. See you next time for more weird stories from the Bible.